your thoughts, first of all, what we're watching here as former President Trump talks with Greg Abbott and the Major General in the Texas Military Department about the actions that they have taken. And we're told that we will not see President Biden again until about 4:05 when he will be speaking in Brownsville.
Look, I think Governor is showing that President Trump was right on border barriers. Border barriers work. Because of the action Governor Abbott taken, whether it's the Constantino wire, was the floating buoys in the river, he's got illegal migration, that area down over 70% because of border barriers, because he's enforcing the law. And remember, Trump built 465 miles of wall. Border barriers work. Every place they built a border barrier, the wall under President Trump, every place, 100% of the time, there was a decrease in illegal migration, a decrease in illegal drug flow, a decrease in deaths. Right? So Governor Abbott's took that game plan and he's putting border barriers up. It's proven effective. Now he's pushing a large part of that illegal population to Arizona and California. He's doing exactly what he should be doing. I've said it many times. Governor Abbott has done more to secure this border than anybody in the Biden administration, and you can see the numbers prove it.
Yeah, he's taken very bold action. And as you point out, the bottom line is lowering the number of deaths. We know how dangerous it is for people crossing the border. The cartels are in complete control of what's happening here. We've seen the horrific car crashes that take place as they try to shuttle people across the border. And one of the other little-known stories is that, there are Americans, even American students in Arizona, who are getting jobs from the cartels to dangerously run these people across the border, Tom. I wonder if President Biden is hearing anything about that today.
Well, I doubt it, but, what you just said is very important. We got 1.9 million gotaways, right? And these are people who are not turning themselves into the Border Patrol. So you got to ask yourself, why did 1.9 million people pay more to get away and be transported by the cartel, be transported by a student who's been contracted by the cartel? Why did they pay more to get away? Why didn't they pay less just to turn themselves in, get a free airline ticket to the city of their choice, get work authorization, get a free hotel room, 3 squares a day, medical attention? Why did they not take advantage of that free giveaway for less money? Why did they pay more to get away? Well, it doesn't take a genius to understand 1.9 million people didn't want to get vetted. They didn't want to get fingerprinted. They wanted to get someplace unscathed, where they don't meet any law enforcement. These are going to be the people carrying the fentanyl. These are going to be the ones trafficking in women and children. These are going to be people from a country sponsoring terror. This is the biggest national security failure I've seen in this nation since 9/11. And one thing I want to mention, you said it earlier, the deaths of illegal aliens. People need to understand. People want to attack President Trump saying his policies inhumane. I mean, I had death threats against my family. Your policy is inhumane, and you're racist, you're white nationalist, whatever they want to call us. But people need to understand, President Trump had illegal immigration down 83 to 90%. So when 83 to 90% less people were coming across the border, how many women didn't get sexually assaulted by the cartels? How many aliens didn't drown in the river or die in the desert? How many Americans didn't die from fentanyl overdoses because the border was secure, less fentanyl was coming across? How many known suspected terrorists didn't get into the country? Under President Biden, we have over 1,700 migrants have died in U.S. soil, our historic record. Over 100,000 Americans dead from fentanyl overdoses, an historic record. Over 300 people on the terrorist watch list arrested since he's been in office, just on the southwest border, twice as many on the northern border that we don't even talk about. Historic record. So President Trump's policy saved lives. A secure border saves lives. Border barrier saves lives. I've worked with 6 presidents. I've seen policies come and go. I know what policies work. I know what policies don't. President Trump was a game changer, and we saved thousands of lives by securing that southern border.
Well, one of the most significant parts of the presidential oath is to protect and defend the country. And that is something that people need to ask themselves as they look at this coming election and the importance of that part of the oath. Will this person protect and defend the country is something that all voters need to think about. Now, one of the interesting issues that's percolating once again, Tom, is the issue of ICE, because we all watched the separation of ICE from the leadership in cities all across the country who said, we're not going to turn anyone into ICE. We're not going to coordinate with ICE. We're not going to cooperate with them when we have people who are illegally in the country who are committing crimes so that they can be deported by ICE. Now you've got the mayor of New York City, Eric Adams, saying, look, we need to reignite that cooperation between New York City police officials, law enforcement officials, and ICE. And one great example is this guy who is the alleged killer of Laken Riley in Georgia, because he was arrested and charged in New York City. He could have been deported, and now this young woman is dead, Tom. What do you think about what Mayor Adams is saying, and do you think you're going to see more of that?
I think Mayor Adams stopped being a law enforcement officer and became a politician. He knows the men and women at NYPD want to work with ICE. He knows the men and women on the front line in that city.
But he's saying they should be doing that again. He wants them to talk to each other again.
They absolutely should be talking to each other, but I think it's a political move. If he wanted them to work together, he would end the sanctuary city policies. If he wanted them to really work together, he'd give ICE access to Rikers Island jail. When I was a director, we had over a dozen agents stationed in Rikers Island where we arrested illegal aliens that committed crimes against U.S. citizens. When they were done with them, we took them into custody, we deported them. Now ICE isn't even allowed access to Rikers Island. So if the mayor wants to really back up his words about working with ICE, end your sanctuary city policies, let your officers work with ICE, and end your sanctuary city policy and let us in Rikers Island jail. That's where the bad guys are. I mean, when I was ICE director, we took over 5,000 criminal aliens off the streets of New York and out of Rikers Island. Now those numbers are dwarfed because they refuse to work with ICE. We don't have access to Rikers Island. And because of sanctuary city policies, NYPD is not allowed to even make a phone call to ICE. So I'm happy he said that. Let's see if this actually follows
words. A lot of
words.
people are happy that he said it. It's very different. You know, the city council, the head of his city council, who needs to vote to pass the things that you just talked about, spoke out and said, absolutely not. We are not going backwards in New York City. We are not going to reinitiate that relationship with ICE. So he's up against that as well. You know, it's obviously a difficult situation. But let me ask you this. The individual who is allegedly the killer of Laken Riley in Georgia, he was arrested and charged with endangering the life of a child in New York when he was here. Apparently, it was his own child, according to reports, didn't have a helmet on the back of like a moped or something like that. And they charged him. Could he have been deported right at that moment under the current laws?
Under current laws, no. Yeah. Because he's claiming asylum, so he's going to wait out for the next hearing if he even shows up the next hearing. But since he has an asylum claim, he can't be deported until that is adjudicated. But here's the difference, right? Under the Trump administration, he wouldn't have been in New York. He wouldn't have been in Georgia. He would have been sitting in Mexico in the Remain in Mexico program, number one. So he wouldn't have been in the United States. Number two, even if they didn't have the Remain in Mexico program, under Trump, when he crossed the border, we ended catch and release. The law clearly says when you enter the country legally without proper documentation, you shall be detained. That is the word, shall. So we ended catch and release. So he would have been in ICE detention under President Trump. Third, under President Trump, the ICE was free to drop detainers on anybody they want. Now the Secretary of Mayorkas has a policy saying ICE can't even issue a detainer to a jail unless that person's been convicted of an aggravated felony. Not arrested for one, convicted. So this administration has failed that family 3 times. It's that awful. Young lady should not be dead. And now you got another set of U.S. citizen parents who are living a nightmare and burying their child. I've met hundreds of Asian moms and dads that had the same situation. Yeah. This administration has caused the ICE not to be able to do their job, and they caused the CBP not to do their job. This administration can put the Remain in Mexico program back in tomorrow. That was a game changer for us. The highest courts in the land said it's legal. So if they're really serious about securing the border, he's down there right now. He can make the decision today to put the Remain in Mexico program back in,
he may.
And that's going to solve 85% of the problem.
He's looking at the numbers in these polls, and he may do just that. It's absolutely unconscionable and defies common sense that anyone who we allow into this country and we allow them to wait for judicial process and we fly them around the country, if they break one law, they should be deported from the country at the bare minimum. I think that's just a basic common sense that I think most Americans would agree with. Tom Homan, thank you very much. Stay with us.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.